This is Farai Paspanojga from the Zimbabwe Monetary Institute. Today I'm going to look at the cause for underdevelopment in Africa. I believe that it's a monetary phenomenon. It is what was intended by Adam Smith and Lord Shelburne when they set out economics, that countries, colonies that they conquered, or even those in the Invisible Empire, as described by Ronald Robinson and John Gallagher, are going to be susceptible to plunder and have to be weak, and they have to be underdeveloped, and they have to think that they can export their way to prosperity. They can basically mine their resources and sell them in order to be prosperous. That's why Adam Smith called his book The Wealth of the Nations. But it was a way of not achieving the wealth of the nation. We believe most things in history and the evolution of civilization shows that monetary effects are very profound, and monetary money is the most important invention on the economic front, and it must be understood and harnessed. The main difference between an industrial age and a dark age is not that man had suddenly grown bigger brains and was able to do stuff that he couldn't do before, but it was that he now understood money, and he was able to develop it and make it central. The Dark Ages were caused by people reverting back to barter, to gold. Well, all great civilizations have money. They knew what money is, and they harnessed it. The civilizations that are lost or that were subservient to these great civilizations basically did not discover money, did not discover how to overcome what we call the limit of barter. For example, people laugh at down here in sub-Saharan Africa that our ancestors didn't even make the wheel. But the main reason they didn't do it was not because they had no brains or they were inferior, but they did not discover money. Money and money followed by specialization and tasks makes certain people move away from subsistence and to concentrate on what's good for the general welfare of people. Now I'm going to talk just briefly about a guy called William Cooper, and the main reason I do it, there's probably two reasons, but the main reason is he claims that now, after having had a very high security clearance and studied all the documents that he studied, he came up to the view that basically all suffering in the world is basically man-made, in that it could have been averted, it can be averted, but certain people stand to gain when other people are poor and suffering and dying, and it's for selfish reasons, but all suffering is basically man-made, and the richer people control the poorer people. And I agree with William Cooper on this. So just a brief background on William Cooper. He was in a military family. His father was in the Air Force. He grew up He lived everywhere. I know he lived in Japan as well. Then he went to Vietnam. He was decorated on some of these speedboats. And after the war, the Vietnam War, he transferred to the Navy. In the Navy, because of his military background and because he had because most people move from the Navy to the Air Force. Hardly people leave the Air Force to go elsewhere. So they put him in naval intelligence and they put him in the briefing team for the Admiral of the Pacific Fleet. So he had a very high security clearance. Basically anything that might possibly help the Admiral of the Pacific Fleet, he had the right to know it. So he had a extremely high security clearance, so he saw a lot of documents. And he's one of these army guys who were discontented by the assassination of JFK. So I first heard him on a Christian program, and he was not from worldwide Christian radio where he was broadcasting, but some other station carried the signal when I was living in Memphis in 2001. And Bill Clinton had said that he was the most dangerous radio announcer on TV. His program was called Hour of the Time, and he predicted 9/11 in 2001. There's a clip on YouTube about how he comes to the conclusion. And he was shot dead at the end of 2001, I think it was in November, when the sheriff's deputies went onto his ranch in Arizona and shot him dead. So with his security clearance, he said he saw documents which people say were validated by the supposed to be some Club of Rome documents on 1950. And he did this in a book he calls The Pale White Horse. And this is from a verse in Book of Revelation, for those who wondering where the name came from. But he said that they decided that Africa would not be developed, and it would be used to, they would just use it to plunder minerals and wealth from it, because its mineral wealth was very great. So the underdevelopment of Africa was planned and implemented. So it's not because of corrupt politicians or whatever reason they give. These are just subsequent reasons of why there's been no development. So we need to understand how economies work and how the British system works, as Lyndon LaRouche would put it. As according to these Americans, they call it the British system. And one of the things that's hidden is that of money creation. The banks create money every time they make a loan. And they create these bank balances which are used for money. They do this by debiting the loan account and crediting the deposit account or the current account of the customer. So they make the loan and put the cash account. You see, people don't think of bank balances as cash because they don't see them. But they're more important than cash because all your big purchases are made. When you buy a house, when you buy land, all the big ticket items, they're all involved by the bank balances, whether using check or using electronic transfers. That's how you pay for your house. That's how you pay for anything significant. That's probably the way that you pay for an airline ticket. That's what you pay for. Pay when you buy furniture. You don't normally walk in with such a big wad of cash, but normally it is financed through something, and this is all bank balances or creation of bank loans. So what's important is at the end of 2013, the German the Bundesbank, the German central bank, issued a publication, and it admitted that banks created money. The banks had always refused this, even though we know that more than 95% of banks created, more than 95% of economists at the turn of the 20th century, that's 1900, knew that the banks created money. But that knowledge is now lost. They've been creating money since at least 1844. That's according to Henry Dunning MacLeod in 1866 in the Theory and Practice of Banking. So the German bank issued this, but this was in German, so hardly a lot of people picked it up. But I had heard someone mention it, so I did look it up and used Google. My German isn't any good. I think I know about 3 or 4 words, like Guten Tag or something like that. I looked it up and I was quite surprised. And the Bank of England followed suit in March 2014, and it should read March 2014, not March 2017. So you can see this publication on the Bank of England website, or you can just Google Bank of England bank creation, and you should bring it up, and you should see it for yourself. It's one of the most important publications ever issued by the Bank of England. The question is why. Some of the reasons that the German bank did it first is, you must remember there was a big hyperinflation in the Weimar Republic around 1923 when the Allies were in charge. What happened is the Allies told the federal authorities in Germany to keep the Reichsbank, the central bank, to give it independence and not to interfere with it. And that's when the Reichsbank, under Heinrich Schacht, decided to hyperinflate. Heinrich Schacht, in his book in 1965, comes out clean and says that him and several bankers agreed to hyperinflate. So it's not by accident. So that's why Germany was, and there were rumors that you could even do hyperinflation on a Western economy, and there was so little knowledge of this bank creation that they would get away with it. In England, I know that there were economists within the banking establishment who were very concerned about what happened to Northern Rock and how little people understood that whatever happened at Northern Rock with the lines, um, which hadn't been seen in more than 100 years in Britain, of people, of bank failing and people lining up to take out their money, and they thought all this suffering was unnecessary. So there was conflict within the banking system. Max Kaiser also puts a good point, which shows that he understands what he understands the concept, and says the economists were scared for their lives. That if they decided that if the banks were going to hyperinflate, the first step they would do is kill everybody who knows anything about money. And basically, I know that anybody who knew what they were talking about money and would say anything about money, they would get killed. They were killed before most of them in around 98, 99, before the hyperinflation started. You know, and I was tested and tempted to talk about bank creation, but I resisted. I just didn't trust the people who were trying to pry for the knowledge, but it was something I'll talk about one day, but not today. And then there are those who say there's no bank creation of money in Zimbabwe. I'll just go back to the time in the 1980s. There were these what they call Burroughs machines that were being used. I went to a finance house, and the bank creation was being done in the finance house and not in the big banks. So each of the banks had a finance house. For example, Standard had Standard Finance, Barclays had Finco, which was called Finco for Finance, Zimbank had Scotfin, Grinley's had Grinley's Finance. And this is before so what would happen is they would debit the loan and credit the deposit account in the finance house, and then this would get transferred through the intercompany into the person's account, and the loan would be held with the finance company. So it was pretty simple to see that loans were being created in these finance houses. Although they ran a little leasing operation with what's called hire purchase, which was, there was a Hire Purchase Act in Zimbabwe, which made it easy for the banks to charge the banks to lend and lease stuff, and there was certain methodology to it. Something that was unique to Zimbabwe at the time, and a carryover from Rhodesia. So there was a lot of leasing going on through these hire purchase, these finance houses, and they had a marketing staff, and the marketing staff thought that the leases and that was the main business of the company, and but money creation was. So after the banks became fully digital with all these computer packages, they no longer needed to have these finance houses, because they could make a loan module and put a password over it, and they could limit who could see any loans. And the thing would be that loans are confidential. They they don't want anybody leaking out information that so and so was given a loan by the bank. So bank creation did happen in Zimbabwe, and also when they digitalized this, they didn't want, when they closed these finance houses, they did not want anybody looking too hard at what's really going on. So they made a smoke screen about whether whether banks can have holding companies, because under the Banking Act, a bank couldn't have a holding company over it. It had to be owned directly by the shareholders. But that also changed when they made this change and closed the finance houses, because they didn't want any scrutiny on any of these finance houses. They wanted the scrutiny to be elsewhere, and that this was just a byproduct of something else that was going on. So all inflation is basically caused by bank creation of money. If we look at, for example, when you look at England, and you look at debasement of currency, there's a guy called Shaw wrote a book about it around 1895, and he says that the worst in the history of money, he says the worst debasement that ever happened in England was under Henry VIII, and it was 5%. So the currency only lost 5% of its value all the time that the monarchs were in charge of the money. But with the bank era and after bank creation, we see you can have a 1,000,000,000% inflation. You can have 100,000% inflation. You can have inflation going over the millions and the billions in percentages. So inflation is definitely, in 99% of the cases, caused by an increase in bank balances. Increase in M3. Milton Friedman has, from the University of Chicago, the late Milton Friedman, he says what you have to do is look at M3 if you want to understand inflation. You will see M3 shoot up before inflation goes up. Okay, not all shooting of M3 will lead to inflation, though. It will only lead to inflation if that increase in bank balance is used for speculation purposes, i.e., it will cause inflation on whatever that money is used for. If it's used to, if M3 goes up and the money is used to the stock market, then the stock market will show a big upswing. If it's used to speculate in another currency, it will cause inflation and probably hyperinflation. An important aspect also about money that we must understand why Africa is undeveloped is that money has been separated from the democratic system. It's the way that society has evolved, particularly in England. But it was already known that you can actually get people having no control of money, and thinking they have a completely democratic system when the Federal Reserve or the central bank is outside the democratic process. So, and most of this has happened in England because you have the Glorious Revolution in 1688. The barons of England basically oust the king. They tell the king they basically tell the king there's an invasion coming in and that um, there is no way he can be protected. The king runs away to France. There's supposed to be a Dutch fleet. They claim the king abdicated. No Dutch fleet lands in England. His daughter, Mary, Queen of Scots, and William of Orange, then become the monarch. Since now there are two people who've got better claim than William of Orange and Mary, Queen of Scots to the throne. The monarch is always scared and is being frightened that they'll be overthrown or there'll be a war. So they give away their rights to the barons to mint money by creation to form the governor and the company of the Bank of England. They give all that power to the Bank of England in return for protection from people who've got a better claim to the throne than they have. And soon after that, when the barons take over the bank, they now go and do what they've always done when a few people control the bank. They give a parliament and people talk about everything else except the money. They only talk about the money that's appropriated from taxes, and they do not talk about the money that is created. Because the reason money is created is so that government can spend more than it taxes. Otherwise, you can go back to barter and there will be no difference. So the democratic system has a big flaw in it. And this is what Carroll Quigley talks about in his book and a few speeches on carrollquigley.net. Some of those speeches have been sanitized. I saw them the first time. He definitely talked about how the banking system and the money was separated from the government, and it's only a fool gets separated from his money, and this was the main point. His speech is there. His speech is still good, but these are some of the things that have been taken away from it, that have been sanitized from it. Even his book online, I read certain people saying certain parts had been cut off. And Carroll Quigley was a professor at Georgetown at the School of Diplomacy. So money is the cog in the wheel. It is the engine of the economy. And money, a government and its money must never be separated. So when you go to school, the whole education process, from when you go in and from kindergarten until the time you leave, either with a PhD or with a master's degree, a bachelor's degree, or a school leaver certificate, or O-level, A-level, whatever level that you leave at. There is no mention of money. If you mention money, especially in history class, like I did causes of the Second World War, the causes of the French Revolution, we were told that you can mention anything. You can read Tolstoy and put stuff that does not relate to France and put it in there. They would most likely give you marks, but do not put that money was the problem, because they will fail you. So you you are in a paradigm where you have academic scrutiny, and you do not talk about money. So money is never subject to academic scrutiny. As they say in a program called Yes Minister, he says that, you see, it's like giving guidelines. It's like brainwashing. What you do is you build the tracks, and then when you put a train on it, don't be surprised when that train follows the tracks. So you have economics where you don't talk about money, you only talk about prices going up and down in virtually all economic models. So the problem, as we're trying to say, is intellectual, and it's about understanding the nature of money, not understanding the uses of money. Because Stanley Jevons, he said that he describes money and he defines money as a medium of exchange, a measure of value, a store of wealth, and a standard for deferred payments. But what he does there is he just gives the uses of money, and that's the definition they've taken. They haven't taken an older definition, for example, by Aristotle, that says money is not by nature but by law. That money is basically what we make it. There are lots of definitions. I believe more in looking at why man moved from barter to money. So I use the one, something given by Al Randall Ray from University of Missouri, Kansas City, where he said that money was created to provision government and to overcome the limits of barter. And he says that is what the ancients had. So you also look at why does every country have a central bank? The US, from the late 1830s till 1914, didn't have a central bank. But they went from 1865, when the country was in ruins, to 1898. They were already a world power when they defeated Spain in the Spanish-American War and gained the Philippines. And you wonder why, with all this criticism of central banking, that you find, why is everybody compliant? It's part of the British system. When we look at the causes of underdevelopment in Africa, we have to understand that what was achieved by warfare in the past can now be achieved by finance, because the goals of warfare and finance are the same. When you had Genghis Khan and the Mongolian hordes going through Europe, they had three goals. They sought to get the land, they sought to get the resources, they sought to get the tribute. But what happened then is happening now, but they no longer use armies, but they go plundering country to country. But they use finance now, and they're people like the IMF and the World Bank. For example, if you look at the World Bank, you look at these directors of the World Bank. It's very interesting. Look at the, I think it's the president of the World Bank that come from the US. Most of them hold very high positions in Department of Defense before they, in DOD, before they go to the World Bank. You've got people like Robert McNamara, you've got Secretary Clay, you've got a lot of them that they've been there for many years, for the majority of the years at the World Bank. They're the guys who make the biggest influence at what goes on in the World Bank. So the goals of warfare and the goals of finance are similar. You also have to understand that what's important is the monetary effect. Because if you look at Ronald Robinson and John Gallagher, they wrote an important paper, very important paper. It's the most quoted paper on imperialism. And it's called the imperialism of free trade. Because we know that free trade was a hoax used to plunder the colonies. That's according to Lyndon LaRoche. And then there they talk about that, too many people, when they think about empire, they think about land, the land empire. They think about the land where the sun never sets. You look at, and that's the name given to Great Britain during the imperial years, where if the sun was setting in India, it was only rising in Canada and other parts of the empire. So the sun never actually set on the whole empire. It was always daylight somewhere in the empire. And it's not where empire is not, because Britain was the mistress of the seas. And everybody had to be compliant, otherwise they would be boxed in. So it's not about that. They say the concept of empire is like an iceberg. The stuff that lies beneath the waters, that lurks beneath the water, is much bigger than the one above the water, and it's more important. So he says this invisible empire is made up of businessmen, bankers, lawyers, accountants, engineers, etc. This is similar language used by Lord Salisbury in his in a book that was written on him by John Chalmers called Splendid Isolation. And they were complaining about the Germans, but when I read this, it occurred to me that this is more of a banking empire. And basically what they're saying is it's a banking system, the banking system, the money creation system. This is the empire. This is the empire where it's invisible to the eye, that politicians believe they're running countries, even though the banks are producing 97% of the money, because he who controls the money over time controls the nation. And Stephen Zarlang of the American Monetary Institute also says that the control over the money supply in most circumstances over time is more powerful than the judiciary, the legislature, and the executive combined. So it is stronger than government. It can subvert government, and it is used to subvert government. I've quoted Lyndon LaRoche, but let's look at his quote exactly. He says, "The point that you have taken very long to grasp is that deregulation, laissez-faire, free market economics, etc. have never functioned. Free trade is a British hoax used to plunder its colonies. Adam Smith was recruited by Lord Shelburne to concoct the wealth of nations. Smith argued that individual selfishness and greed lead to the common good. In fact, national governments are the guarantors of general welfare. Perhaps you ought to read Alexander Hamilton." Alexander Hamilton did say that that's what government job is, to guarantee the common welfare, the general welfare of people. Government's job is to lift people from poverty. I do talk about the role of Adam Smith. I did a video on that, so we're not going to go on to that today. And I do talk about this quote on selfishness. But you must understand that the whole economic system, or what Lyndon LaRoche calls the British system, is a system, an intellectual system, where people are told to work hard, export harder, so you can send your stuff to Britain. You can send stuff to the London Market Exchange. You can send stuff to the Chicago Metals Exchange. And you are running the treadmill for the British and the Americans. That is the essence of the system. And it's a cleverly put system. So we go back to, well, as we've stated right at the beginning of this video series, was money was created to provision government and to overcome the limits of barter. And so now we're looking more towards the solution type of what we're saying. These are some of the problems and some of the monetary flaws that we saw in Africa in terms of the way they think about money, and the way that we think about money. And here's part of the solution. Money was created to provision government to overcome the limits of barter. And we'll come back to that in detail, because that is part of this, that is the solution. Then we get this thing about offshore havens and a misunderstanding of what really is going on. Offshore havens were started in the 50s and 60s by mainly British and American companies, these multinational companies. So what they would do is, these are things, you should understand them as being flags of convenience. What happens is they plunder resources, say from Congo, from Africa somewhere, and then they ship them to factories somewhere else. It might even be Malaysia, China, States, UK, to factories over there. And they have to have a place where they take the where they pay taxes, because what happens is they buy them very cheap in Africa, because what they do is they will buy them for what they call net realizable value. So So what they do is they'll take a price, say at the London Metals Exchange, the LME. They'll take, let's say the price of copper is whatever, say $10 a ton or $10 a kilogram. And then they take the costs, cost, insurance, and freight. They subtract that from the price, and that's the price that they will um, will pay the African subsidiary, being the net realizable value. Because they'll say, listen, this price applies to this commodity being landed in London or Chicago Metal Exchange, or if we landed to the U.S. coast, then that price applies. But we can't give you that price. We have to subtract the cost to bring it to market. You know, the cost, insurance, and freight. The insurance and freight to that. And what you then see is the freight charges are made very expensive, and so that's where the profit basically is. So the profit is from these countries like Liberia or any other, Panama. Most of these countries are dependencies of either the U.S. or of England, and they're countries with very little tax or no taxation, and they have no means, even if they do have that little taxation, to find out the total freight carried by these carriers from the different countries. They don't have a way of collecting these taxes or knowing which company carried stuff on the vessels from their country, because these vessels are registered in these countries, but they never go to these countries. So these offshore havens are places basically where these big corporations take their taxes. And if you look at them in detail as well, you find that they're all just branches of US banks or British banks. And these countries are heavily protected by, for example, if you look at places like Cayman Islands, there's always been a British flotilla of ships, a group of ships, army warships that guard these islands. The money never goes to these islands. These are just bookkeeping entries. When they say they're sending money, you're sending these monies to your offshore haven. You go to Chase Manhattan or whatever bank and send your money. They're just basically doing a debit entry. The money never leaves the US. It's just an entry. There's no real money there. You can't go out and probably cash all your money out in the Caymans or whatever haven you have. So it's a misunderstanding to think that these are places where dictators will leave a lot of their money. Yes, they can only leave a lot of their money if they're in good books with the Americans. But most of these offshore havens, look at Panama or whatever, these countries are totally dependent on the US for their protection. So this offshore havens are just places to plunder places in the third world like Africa. And people misunderstand them as just putting money offshore or doing things like that. This is just basically putting money either into British pounds or pound sterling. Sorry, pound sterling or US dollars. So the solution is one, a country must have its own currency. current situation in Zimbabwe, for example, where there's no currency, will not help develop a country. It retards a nation. Yes, put the money, put the banks under the supervision of the Ministry of Finance or any other uh, organ that's directly accountable to Parliament. Stop the banks from creating money. Money creation is a sovereign right and should not be in private hands. It is a sovereign right, so much so that no foreign bank should ever be able to create money. That is totally unacceptable. They don't do that in America, in Britain. That's why you don't see many foreign banks in these countries, because they realize that money creation is a sovereign right. The government should then deficit spend on infrastructure, and they should preferably not subcontract on infrastructure. Government must put the infrastructure. We have there should be no PPPs, public-private partnerships, stuff like that. They should just go ahead and do the infrastructure. You have a problem with a lot of these, what we call in accounting, cost-plus contracts. Okay, so what happens is, I say I give you a contract to build a certain road, and I say that we will reimburse you, or you can get back your costs plus 40%, plus 30% profit. The problem with that is, and it happened in the Second World War. William Buckley, who was the most decorated U.S. soldier, talks about that. In 1832, that war is a scam. You have these cost-plus contracts, and what happens is, you tell a guy you get your cost plus 30%. The thing is now, he's gonna push up his costs, because the more he spends on his costs, the more profit he makes. So for example, if he's gonna be reimbursed in a hotel expenses, he's not gonna stay in a cheap hotel, he's gonna find the most expensive hotel. This is just an example, but what then happens is, he then goes into it's very lucrative for the contractor to find the most expensive contract, or even pay more than other people are paying on the market for a good, as long as he's going to be reimbursed cost plus. He doesn't look to cut corners, he doesn't look to cut costs. He goes for the most expensive things, because the more he spends, the more profit he makes, which is unlike what we expect in business. In business, the more cost you incur, the less profit you have on a normal contract. But on these cost-plus contracts, the more you spend, the more profit you make. So we're going to look at what we talk about all the time. And it's a very important concept to grasp. So here we've got this line. We've got money on the y-axis, time on the x-axis. So these are the total cash inflows coming into a government. These are probably taxes. So they change every year. So this line here, we call this the line of barter. So what happens is, a government cannot spend more than it makes, so it can only spend below this line. It cannot spend above this line when it's in barter. But under money, it can it is no longer limited by the cash inflows. It can spend above this line. And that's why money was created. That's what we call by overcoming barter. So if you're using someone else's currency, you have to wait for the economy to do well before you can spend. You have to earn the taxes before you can spend. But under money, you're no longer reliant on what you're making in taxes. You can spend without collecting taxes. So we're looking at government concentrating its efforts on the monetary aspects and not on the structuralist aspect. Because you must understand that control of the money supply is more powerful. This is according to Stephen Zarlanger, American Monetary Institute, than the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary combined in certain circumstances. So it is more powerful than the executive, legislature, and judiciary combined, and this is over time. So it is the most important force within a government. Michael Hudson, an advisor to the US, Canadian, Mexican, Russian governments, had a book which was official advice to the Canadian government. I walked into a library in Toronto and I saw this. I'd seen the book on the catalog when I was online. So when I went to the library, I went to see if this book actually was on the shelf, and it was. It was called Canada, the New Monetary Order, Borrow, Devalue, Restructure. And it was from 1978. The advice had been given years earlier, but the book was only published many years later. It was my first time ever to see any official advice to a government, especially from a top economist like Michael Hudson. I've read a few of his books. He had a book on imperialism. He's had a lot of good books. He's had books on protectionism in the United States for the century between 1815 and 1914, Killing the Host, and other books, economic related books, but they are a refreshing change from the normal. So in it, he says there are two types of economists, structuralists and monetarists. Okay, monetarists believe that if the money is right in a country, it will not experience any big problems, any deep-seated problems. And he says that he's a monetarist. And the people at the Bank of Canada, which is the central bank in Canada, are also monetarists. And he says he knows these people well. And then he says then there are these structuralists. And he's talking about mainly these third world economists. These economists want to fix everything but the money. They want to change the structure of this and that. And he pokes fun at them, and he says when these people have problems, they linger because the solution is simple. It is they have to fix the money. And he says that in a talk that you see it's money is like a household in certain aspects. For example, if in a household, you can have a housewife who has monetary problems, has economic problems. She just there's not enough money coming into the household. Up to a certain extent, she can try to improvise on the diet, but at a certain stage, it will get impossible. And that's the same thing with the country. You have to fix the money. and it's internally generated money that you have to fix and not going out to do so. And then you have economic structural adjustment program, for example, that Zimbabwe underwent in the 90s. It is clear with this statement by Michael Hudson that these structuralist programs were never meant to work and never will work because they fix everything except the money. And that's the view of most economists. You also have developmental economists, and they are also structuralists. They deal with everything but the money, but the monetary system. They do not know how to fix it. They do not want to fix it. Then also you can have subsidies and price support for growing food. You must remember Ghana, they had regime change in a year where cocoa and coffee prices fell by 80%. So you must never be too reliant on these cash crops because um, you will get a shock one day when you get economic problems that are beyond your control. Mozambique, they have a saying that cotton's the mother of poverty. This is because of the abuse that they underwent with the Portuguese. They would give very low prices. They would force the farmers to grow cotton, give them a lot of cotton seed, and give them very little money for the cotton crop. Peg exchange rates like Smith did in this country. Do protectionism for industries. As we go back again, government must control the banks and then deficit spend. It's we believe underdevelopment in Africa is a monetary problem, and it's solvable by 3, 4 easy main steps, even though there are many other steps they can do. But government should control the banks and then get the right view on money. And it'll be that easy to develop Africa. It's not a matter about importing more, about manufacturing more, but first of all get the right perspective on money and spend the money on the infrastructure. Thank you very much for listening in. If you have any comments or suggestions, put them below.